Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gats and kittens, comic book fans all over the world. Welcome to another episode of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a world renowned, world famous, celebrated across the globe comic book writer about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's get right to it. Dan Battles asks, you've mentioned Dan Didio a few times in your videos. He's a polarizing figure. Do you have any good or bad experiences you could share when you worked with him? Yeah, I worked with him briefly, and much of it remains a mystery to me. He came in as editor-in-chief, publisher, or whatever, hi muckety muck, Graham Poobah of DC Comics, and he came from the music industry, and I think he thought he was going to run comics, DC Comics, like the music industry, by getting a lot of PR flack out there and media coverage and stuff like that, which generally doesn't translate into comic book sales. My experience with him is, he asked an editor to reach out to me to ask me to do some Return to Robin, a title I had written 100 issues of. And because they were going to bring the spoiler back to life. They had killed the spoiler in a horrible way, and a character I created, and they wanted me to come and bring her back, which I accomplished until they fired me. And then I was up in New York visiting with some publishers, some book publishers. I spent a few days up there, and I stopped by the DC offices just to see if there was anybody left there that I still knew. And the Dio saw me and offered me Batman and the Outsiders, which was a title that was already being written by my friend Tony Bedard, but they decided that he had turned in 3 issues of script, and they decided he wasn't going in the direction that they liked, so they're going to fire Tony. I felt bad about that, and replace him with me. I felt kind of good about that. So I was going to have this terrific art team and blah, 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 lots of promotion. And I was given a free reign, except they had already commissioned the covers for the first few issues, so I had to kind of do stories that followed what was on the cover, which wasn't a terrible problem. And my team had been decided for me, my team of outsiders, and I was cool with that too. I'm pretty adaptable. I'm pretty flexible, and so we were off to the races. But it was weird because I was sort of hired on an impulse, and from everything I've heard about Dan Didio, I never had a lot of contact with him. I disagree with him in a lot of big ways about comics and DC Comics' role in the industry, the medium. I mean, I don't think there was, I think our Venn diagram when it comes to comics is 2 entirely separate circles, separated by a great distance. So, didn't see eye to eye. But so he gave me the Outsiders, and I was digging it. I had a great art team, and I was really into it. And I was making long range plans. I was planning out like 2 years of arcs leading to this big confrontation on the moon. If you've read my run on this, you realize I was planning something big for the moon, some kind of a battle there. And and I thought, I'm doing good. I got 2 monthlies at DC. Everybody seems to like them. I was writing way ahead, and they called me and said I was fired. My editor said I was fired from both books, and I, of course, said why? What did I do? I had very little communication from them, yay or nay about what I was doing, and they said they weren't allowed to tell me why I was being fired. So I was like, what, did I say something? What happened here? And so I was suddenly no longer employed by DC. And the weird thing is if you know me, I work way ahead of schedule. I'm a big proponent of working way past your deadlines. And so I had turned in a total of like $30,000 worth of work that they were never going to use. They just, departed entirely from my, from what I was doing. And the even weirder thing is that both writers who took over the books after me contacted me to apologize. They felt bad about taking the books away from me, just as I had contacted Tony Bedard and said I felt bad about taking the book away from him, which was nice. But I never, to this day, ever learned the reason why I was fired. So I would say I've had no good experiences with Dan Didio, and I'm glad he's gone from DC. Although what showed up to replace him doesn't seem to be much better. So yeah, there's my little history. Dan Didio. Wait a minute. Did you get a twin spin? I think you get a twin spin. Yes, you do, Dan Battles. Louise Simonson, in my opinion, is very underrated as a writer. I know she was on the Superman side of DC, but do you have any interactions with her during the 90s? Louise Simonson, wife of Walt Simonson. Um, I knew of her. I think I met her a few times in the DC offices. I don't have any funny anecdotes uh, about the two of us. She was usually in the company of Walt when I met her. And if you've ever met Walt Simonson, he's a bit of a talker. So I don't think Louise said a whole lot. But boy, she was highly respected within the DC offices for her talents, affectionately called Wheezy by her friends. And, she'd earned it. I agree with you. Underrated writer. She created Power Pack over at Marvel, which caused quite a sensation at the time. It was really the first new Marvel property created in a while. And particularly one that was not based on any prior Marvel creations and took the universe in a slightly different direction, with a team of, kid mutants, kid superheroes, and got a lot of attention at the time, deservedly so, because it was well done. Yeah, Louise Simonson, terrific talent, but I didn't have any, as you say, she was on the Superman side of things, so I didn't have a lot of contact with her. But I can't think of anyone who has a better reputation in the business. Yvonne Makila, what's your opinion about the movie No Country for Old Men? I'm asking because for me, it sucks. Oh man, what a boring movie. Except by Tommy Lee Jones's character, as usual, I didn't like anything. On the other hand, I keep seeing people saying it's one of the best movies ever, or so. So I'm looking for someone who will agree with me or hopefully find out what I'm missing here. Well, I'm not going to agree with you. No Country for Old Men is based on a novel by Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy famously writes novels that are considered unfilmable by Hollywood. They've been trying to make a movie of his book, Blood Meridian, for decades. And personally, I hope they never do, because it is unfilmable. So much of what he writes is unfilmable. These are novels. They are meant to be read and enjoyed as novels. McCarthy didn't write for Hollywood. He didn't write for anybody but himself. McCarthy was such an iconoclast. He was living in an uninsulated shack in the woods, I think in northern Kentucky, in the 70s, and he was getting some renown as a novelist, but not making a lot of money at it. And he was invited by a university to come speak about his most recent novel. They were going to pay him $2,000 in the 70s. That was quite a chunk of change back then. They were going to pay him $2,000 and to come speak about his novel, and he refused because he said, "My work speaks for itself." And his wife was so angry at him because he's paying you $2,000. Just go talk, just answer some questions about your novel. And as she wrote, they lived on beans for the next couple of months because he wouldn't go talk about his novel. So this is not a guy thinking about Hollywood, and it's obvious. And most of the movies made from his books fail. Along come the Coen brothers, and they want to adapt No Country for Old Men. And, they're auteur filmmakers. They're daring kind of guys. They don't take no for an answer. They are hardcore filmmakers. They liked the book. They thought they could turn it into a movie. And I think largely they did. They took an unfilmable book. They recognized what was filmable in it and left the rest behind. I'm really sorry they left a couple of my favorite scenes out of the movie that were in the book, but they wouldn't have fit a movie version. They wouldn't have worked as a movie. Now, What do I like about it? Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones is awesome in this movie. He's incredible. He's a fantastic performance. He's the heart and soul of this movie. But what you have to understand about Cormac McCarthy is he is all about the exploration of mortality and evil. You know, he's very much writes about the limited time we all have on this planet and what do we do during that time. He also writes about the presence of real evil, that people are capable of horrible things and possibly driven by the demonic. McCarthy's big thing is that spirituality is stronger than language. In other words, there's something binding us all together as a race, and I mean a human race, that transcends language. There's no explaining it. And he deals with that, particularly in the final scene. Well, in much of the movie, I mean, Tommy Lee Jones is our witness to what goes on in the film. And maybe I should talk about the film itself. In the film, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Josh Brolin comes across a drug deal gone wrong out in the Texas desert, and unwisely decides to help himself to a bag full of money. And that's not going to end well for him. And it's pretty obvious from the beginning. This is not your standard kind of thriller movie. This is where the hero is going to win out in the end, because McCarthy is about evil. Evil is with us. Evil is everywhere. Evil often triumphs. There's no justice in the world. That's a McCarthy theme. And of course, the evil takes the form of Anton Chigurh, played by Javier Bardem, in an outstanding performance as a deeply disturbing, psychotic individual who is sent to retrieve that money, get that money back. And Chigurh is literally going to stop at nothing to get the job done, because that's his reputation. And so the witness to all of this is Tommy Lee Jones, who he contemplates where the world is going. That he's been a Texas lawman all these years, and he's never seen anything like this, and he's seeing more and more of it. He's seeing that we're living in a fallen world, and it's falling faster and faster. It's a society. The wheels are coming off society. He really fears for the future of mankind, for civilization, and but he's an older, retiring lawman. What's he going to do about it? There's nothing he can do about it, and he realizes that. And so at the final scene of the film, which is absolutely brilliant performance, and brilliantly written by McCarthy, and thankfully the Coen brothers don't change a word of it. Jones contemplates the spiritual, and he tells a story about a dream he had. He tells a story to his wife about a dream he had, in which he and his father are riding at night, and his father will ride ahead of him and light a fire so that he'll know where to find his father. And of course, what is this about? This is about mortality. This is about the afterlife. This is about where do we go after we die. This is about what was this all about? And he will one day be reunited with his father, and presumably all of his other loved ones in a better place. So that's really what the movie's about, and it doesn't ever try to be a thriller, a standard Hollywood thriller, because that's not what McCarthy's writing. McCarthy, in his early years, wrote novels. There were a lot of portrait novels, a lot of deeply, densely worded prose, like in the William Faulkner vein. His early novels are difficult. I can say this because I'm halfway through Suttree, it's an uphill climb, but I'm enjoying it. The language, his use of language is incredible. But later in his life, he turned to genre fiction. He wrote post-apocalyptic stuff. He wrote crime thrillers. He wrote modern-day westerns, but never in the way you would expect. They were all these genres were filtered through his mind to present his themes about evil, about spirituality, about mortality. And I can't tell you to love the film if you didn't like the film, if you found it boring. It's one I watch. I want to watch it today again. So, it's, everybody's mileage may vary on this stuff. I love the book. I love the movie. I can't say that about any other Cormac McCarthy movie. I haven't liked any of the ones that I've seen other than No Country for Old Men. Because I think the Coen brothers got it, and other filmmakers don't understand McCarthy. I can't say that I fully understand McCarthy, but I sure know what I like about him. And I sure like this movie. And that's it. That's all I can say about it. I don't know how old you are. Maybe when you're older, you could revisit this film, maybe understand it a little better. I hate to say it like that. It's so boomer to say that. But it's true. Thomas Pellegrino, what do you think of Jim Silk's art and his work on Bettie Page? Well, I mean, Jim Silk, terrific illustrator, photographer, all kinds of things. This guy's he's a jack of all trades. He wears many hats. Yeah, I mean, as I like it. I can't really say much else about it. Okay, you get a twin spin, my friend. Thomas Pellegrino wants to know also, is Bettie Page in the public domain because she's a public figure? I don't think a lot of the images of Bettie Page were copyrighted. The little bit I know about the history of Bettie Page is that she was a camera model, a photographer's model, and by that I mean you could go to the studio where she worked and pay to take pictures of her, and you could bring costuming and request poses. You see where I'm going. And she was, I believe, managed by a guy named Irving Claw with a K. I mean, what a name. What a perfect name for a guy who runs a business where you give him money so you can take pictures of pretty girls. Why does Bettie Page endure? Well, she was, certainly an attractive woman, but she had this kind of innocent quality. Even when she was in naughty pictures, she had this innocent girl next door, like, all American girl kind of look. And I think that was what was the appealing thing. The strangest thing is her connection to comics, most famously Dave Stevens. But Bettie Page has been used over and over again as a model for characters in comic books. And I remember early comic book conventions, there'd be all this Bettie Page books and Bettie Page pictures and Bettie Page posters. And I'm like, who's Bettie Page? She's this, remnant from late 50s, 42nd Street photography studios. I mean, it's kind of a weird history. Now, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of Bettie Page scholars out there, and you're going to write in and correct me on everything I just said. But I'm just repeating the legend. I'm repeating what I heard. Never did a real deep dive on Bettie Page. Okay, let's go. Triple spin. Thomas Pellegrino, delving even deeper into the skeevy. Also, why do you think Steve Ditko denies working on Sweeter Gwen? Sweeter Gwen is a comic book, graphic novel, whatever you want to call it, produced in the early 60s. And it was sold in adult bookstores, I imagine. I don't know where this thing was sold. Back alleys by mail, came in a plain brown wrapper, and it was a comic book about bondage. It was a fetish comic, and it was drawn and written by this guy Eric Stanton, and he made his entire career on drawing fetish comics like this, and he was well known to be a good friend of Steve Ditko's. They were pals. And it's pretty damn obvious Steve Ditko worked on a lot of this stuff with Stanton, either inking over him or doing the whole job. And also, from what I understand, Stanton would assist him uncredited on inks on Spider-Man, inking backgrounds and filling in blacks and things like that. So they were pals and working colleagues and everything else. And for whatever reason, Ditko agreed to do these fetish comics that Stanton was apparently having some success with. I guess he made money. I mean, the cover price on this thing's $3.95, so I guess he was doing all right. Why he won't admit it, I think it's pretty obvious. I mean, when you do work like this, you don't want to really own it. It's like, I was helping out a pal. I was making a couple extra bucks. I wasn't hurting anybody, but I don't really want anybody to know about it. It's not hard to understand. Eric McCrae, I am very interested in collecting your Civil War adventure comics. How would I go about acquiring copies of your books? Well, Civil War Adventures is a 2 trade paperback books worked on by Gary Quapis and I. We wrote and drew them and published them ourselves with our own money and lost all of it. Didn't make a dime off of it. So we stopped doing them. We learned our lesson. Civil War aficionados hated comic books. They didn't want to see them, and comic book fans could care less about the Civil War. Now, if you want the first one, I have copies. So if you want to contact me at brunobookstore.com, I'll have the address again at the end of this video, the email address, brunobookstore@gmail.com. I have copies of this, and I'll sell you one, and sign it. The second copy, long out of print, don't have any copies. Dover Publishing owns the rights to these now, and they do publish both volumes. So I think if you go to Amazon, you can get the second volume from Dover. I don't have any copies, except a couple of copies I kept for myself. But let me know. I'll hook you up. Andre Santana. Archie Goodwin and Mark Grunwald, what made them achieve the status of great editors? What makes a great group editor, comic editor, and editor-in-chief? I knew Archie. I worked a lot with Archie. I didn't ever really directly work with Mark Grunwald. I told stories about my one unfortunate encounter with Mark Grunwald. Not putting Mark Grunwald down. Man, he was beloved. He was beloved as a comic editor. The loyalty he instilled in his freelancers was amazing, much like Archie. So I can only assume that Archie Goodwin, that Mark Grunwald shared a lot of the qualities with Archie Goodwin. What made Archie Goodwin great was he could do it. He could write. He could draw. In a pinch, he could letter. And as every editor learns in comics, you've got to learn to color, especially at Marvel, where things run late. And editors are right there in the bullpen coloring stuff to get it to the printers on time. Anyway, Archie, he could do it. He loved the medium. Didn't necessarily care, yeah, he loved Batman, he loved Superman, he loved, all of these characters, but mostly he loved the medium. And he was adept at all of it. He was good at all of it. He, for my money, the best writer ever to work in American comics. And he was sometimes too nice a guy. His reputation was a super nice guy, and he was super nice, funny, engaged. But he knew how to traffic. He knew how to stay in touch with his freelancers, which is important because freelancers will go radio silent if they're running behind deadline. You got a guy drawing your book, and you don't hear from him, and he doesn't answer the phone. It means he's going to miss the deadline. And Archie would have a way of instilling in you a loyalty to him to the point where you did not want to disappoint him. You did not want to have to tell Archie, I screwed up. I don't have the stuff done that I promised I would get done. And so by being a nice guy, by being kind of a soft touch, and being engaged with his freelancers, the level of respect that we all had for him meant you didn't want to disappoint him. So you were going to get your work done on time. You were going to, knuckle down and finish it for Archie because Archie was such a cool guy. And like I said, funny guy. And now Archie was editor-in-chief of Marvel for about 5 minutes because he realized he just didn't have it. Because you have to be a bit of a son of a bitch to be an editor-in-chief. You've got to be able to lie to people. You've got to be able to hide the truth. You've got to be able to fire people and read the riot act. And that was never Archie's style. Archie was you also have to be a bit of a micromanager. Archie was none of those things. He was a hands-off editor, an invisible editor. He would hire people he knew could do the job and then urge them to do their best and do everything he could to help them do their best work. And as I said, he could do it all. But most comic editors can't do any of the jobs they're asking you to do. But Archie could do them all better than you. It was much like Larry Hama, or Denny O'Neil. These were guys they could do it. They were capable, and they were legends. And so you're working for a legend. You got to up your game, and that's what made him a terrific editor. But editor in chief, you got to be willing to cut throats. That was never Archie. I think Archie was the last editor in chief before Jim Shooter took over, and Archie was like, "Oh, thank God this guy showed up." I can't do this. I can't do this. Okay. Andre Santana again. What are your thoughts on the development and expansion of the Bat family members in general? Well, there's an awful lot of them, aren't they? I mean, I'm looking at this picture, and I'm going to be quite honest with you. I don't know who some of these people are. They've really expanded it. I mean, you could complain, certainly, that with Robin, Nightwing, Batgirl, and I'm guilty. I reintroduced the Huntress to DC Universe. You could say, well, hey, who are you to talk? But, I just think they've thrown everything but the kitchen sink, hoping that these characters would take off. And I see fan responses. I really like Damian Wayne character. I really like Red Robin, whoever Red Robin is, and all this. But okay, there are fans, but there's some character in some comic is always some fan's favorite. I don't see this as translated into sales overall. It seems like a quantity, not quality kind of thing. They're putting out a lot of Batman titles because in the aggregate, I guess they do okay, but none of these characters has broken through. None of these characters has been a hit on their own. I would say that largely the comic book reading audience has rejected a number of these new Batman family members. But DC's still hanging on to them because, for whatever reason. And Andre Santana again. Inkers. Who are the inkers, in your opinion, who make the entire difference for better, like Klaus Janson, or for worse, like Vince Colletta? Inking, comic book inking, to me, the inkers in comics are the Jedi of the comic book industry, of comic book creators, because no one can quite define what they do. Unless you're in the business and you see it, you get it. But what do? Are they just tracing the pictures, whatever? No, they're adding depth and weight. They're delineating. Now, why do they have to do that? Because pencils don't reproduce well enough to do color comics. And a lot of pencilers, I'm thinking of John Buscema, draw very, very loose. If they knew someone else was inking them, very loose pencils that needed a degree of interpretation. And really, that's what an inker is doing. He's interpreting the penciled artwork, turning it into inked artwork that can be reproduced for publication. And that's simply what he's doing. But it's so much more than that. It's like the inker has to decide how much embellishment, about the placement of blacks in each panel, which is very, very important when it comes to establishing depth in the artwork. And the inker is really all about that. A bad inker can make the artwork appear flat and lifeless, what inkers call a dead line. A good inker can make the work seem lively and animated and provide lots of depth. It's something that you know when you see it. And that's the beauty of comics, is that you can see the hand. You can see the hand of the artist in the art. You can see, now you don't recognize it as that, unless you've really studied this stuff. But you recognize it as a consumer. Trust me, when you're reading the book, if it seems there's a kinetic energy, there's some lightning in the bottle here. Yes, the penciler provides that initial energy because the artwork is kinetic, but the inker brings that forth. The inker's job is to not bury that penciled energy under a bunch of dead lines, under a bunch of lifeless ink. Uh, that's why so many inkers use brush. Brush, you can vary this is really esoteric stuff, and I'm not an inker. I'm horrible at inking, which is why I admire inkers so much. But if you understand what I'm trying to say, that poorly inked work is dead on the page. A good inker brings all that out with a lively line, with brush work and ink work and and pen work. I'm not explaining this well, but I'm doing my best here. I'm a writer. I write comics. I don't draw them. I couldn't draw them. I tried. I couldn't. I failed. Now, as far as combinations, I always say the pencilers and inkers, it's like a marriage. Does it work? Does it not work? I mean, look at this. This is Bill Sienkiewicz over Jim Aparo. I mean, this is apples and oranges. This is cats and dogs. Bill Sienkiewicz's style and Jim Aparo's style could not be more different, but look how beautifully they work together. And Sienkiewicz doesn't override Aparo. You can still see the Aparo here, but he's bringing a little bit of himself to it as well. And it makes it really pop, makes it really work. Because, as Jim Aparo got older and stuff like that, he got a little bit, nothing against Jim Aparo, fantastic. And this happens to all of us as creators, a little stuck in his ways, a little, rote in how he would present some stuff. And here Sienkiewicz kind of returns Aparo to his days of glory by working on this. Now, I worked with, I know a lot of pencilers as friends. Sergio Cariello, who only wants to ink himself. He won't let anybody near his pencils because he likes inking himself. I worked a lot with Graham Nolan, and Graham Nolan, it's a terrific inker of his own. But because we talked a lot, I would hear a lot of back and forth about, I didn't like this inker, I didn't like that inker. When we were on Detective, we were getting a different inker for each arc. And I think both Graham and I agree that the best guy over Graham, other than Graham himself, was Eduardo Barreto. Barreto really understood what Graham was going for and added it's like an organic quality to the work that really, it was all Graham all the time, and Ed never altered anything, but he just had a way of just bringing the Grahamness out of the work with a little touch of his own approach to the stuff. And invariably, as far as the art goes, my favorite arcs on Detective were the ones where Graham and Ed worked together. Now there were a few inkers. I mean, Sienkiewicz did a terrific job on over Graham on a arc, and of course, Scott Hanna did amazing stuff with Graham. But there were a couple that Graham wasn't real happy with. I wasn't real happy with either, because some makers will alter the artwork and just not follow the line. Even when Graham does layouts, his layouts are like contour drawings. They're just it's the full art without any shading put in. So it's not that hard to figure it out. You figure out your light source, you know where to put the blacks. I'm getting way too technical. Let's move on to the next question. Joshua Ignatowski, jigsaw puzzles or word puzzles? I'm a jigsaw puzzle man. I'm a crossword puzzle man. Jigsaws, every once in a while we'll get one for Christmas, and we'll work over the holidays doing a jigsaw. I bought one last year, and it was this huge 3,000 piece puzzle, and it was all Silver Age Marvel comics covers. And I thought it'd be easy because I knew these covers. And man, it drove us crazy for a month, and then we packed it up and sold it on eBay because we couldn't do it. It was driving us crazy. And of course, my wife, who's not into comics, it was making her insane. So we had to get rid of it. But yeah, I do the Wall Street Journal crossword every single day, and I'm including this one because if you look up there at the top, Bane was a crossword clue. How cool is that? It's the only reason I scanned this and saved it. But yeah, I'm a crossword puzzle guy. I like crossword puzzles. What can I say? And the weird thing about crossword puzzles is you get to know, Wall Street Journal credits the puzzle maker, and you get to know those puzzle makers after a while, and it gives you a clue into their head about what wordplay or pun they're going for. and you can figure it out. And I don't know if you knew this. Gary Larson, who did the Far Side comic strip for years, is a frequent crossword puzzle writer or creator for Wall Street Journal. And whenever I see his name, I know there's going to be a lot of animals in the clues. So there you go. There's a piece of useless information you didn't need to know. Crossword puzzles or jigsaw puzzles. Hey, we got 10% more Ignatowski. Do you have a favorite urban legend? Yeah, alligators in the sewer. I mean, you can't beat it. There was an urban legend in the 60s. People were coming home from Florida, visiting Florida, and they bring home baby alligators. This is real. And until alligators were considered to be endangered and they stopped this practice, people were bringing home baby alligators. You could go to roadside stands and pick out a gator to bring home. And of course, baby alligators become big alligators, which over time become really big alligators, and they're a dangerous animal. But I remember stuffed alligators were a big thing. My aunt had a 4-piece alligator mariachi band, complete with sombreros and guitars, on the mantle in her living room. So, alligator things were a big deal in Florida tourism until they decided they were an endangered species. Until a couple of years ago, decided they weren't an endangered species. So you can hunt alligator again, no problem, because they're everywhere. And the urban legend is that people would bring these alligators home from vacation, and then when they got tired of them, or the alligator became a little too big, or a little too snippy, or a little too unruly, they'd flush the alligator down the toilet. And of course, that didn't kill it, and it lived in the sewers. The New York sewers were full of alligators. And even further, albino legend was that a second generation of sewer alligators were born albino because they never saw the sunlight. So, as far as urban legends go, that's about the coolest one I've ever heard. Oh, Ignatowski again. In recent times, the term strong female character has become something of a loaded buzzword that typically translates to meaning of Mary Sue. But as someone who's written loads of heroines and heroes alike, from Birds of Prey to Batman, would you say the actual definition of a strong character, whether the character be male or female? Let's stick with the females. Ripley from Aliens, a strong female character. She doesn't have all the answers, but she meets every challenge eventually, narrowly escaping death as the rest of her crew members are picked off. She's pretty quick in figuring out what's going on, how much danger they're in, and taking the decisive action of destroying their entire ship to get rid of this thing. Her only weak point is that damn cat. Ripley's a terrific character, but she's always believable. She doesn't have all the answers from the beginning. She learns with us as we go along. The main thing about her is her decisiveness. Now, physically, she's not imposing. She's not going to be able to fight the alien to a standstill physically. Well, no one in the crew is, but certainly she isn't going to be able to do that. And also she shows a little bit of annoyance with fellow crew members, Harry Dean Stanton and Yaphet Kotto, because they're a pair of jokers. But she's a fully realized character. She's not perfect in any way. She's not flawless. She's got to learn and sacrifice and everything else to get along, as opposed to what you termed as the Mary Sue character. The Mary Sue character is wonderful at everything from the beginning of the story. She doesn't need men. She doesn't need men telling her what to do. She's going to be the best. She's going to be the greatest. There's no sacrifice. There's no training involved. There's no nothing. She's just fantastic. She's just a wonderful woman. She's girl boss. Yeah. And it's tiresome and uninteresting and dull. And in the end, demeaning, I believe, toward women, because you're treating women like children. You remember when you were a kid, when a really little kid, everything you did was wonderful. Yes, Johnny, you're the best drummer. You're the best jumper. You run faster than all the others. Yeah, you're fantastic. And we're putting your artwork up on the refrigerator, son, because it's all great. Okay, well, none of that was true. But, as a kid, your parents aren't going to, they are going to lie to you. But apparently, Mary Sue characters, their parents lied to them even into adulthood, that you're great, you're wonderful, you're fantastic at everything. And, as we get older, we learn, okay, my parents were just saying that because they're my parents and they love me. I'm not going to get that reaction from the rest of the world. I'm going to go out. I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to have setbacks, and and hopefully I'm going to learn from them and grow as a character. Mary Sue characters don't do any of that. They're just come out perfect and wonderful, and there's no problem they can't solve instantly. They just know it all. They got all the answers, and they are dull. I made my bones in this business writing strong female characters, from Evangeline to Valkyrie. I got known that, this guy can write women. I credit being raised with two older sisters for that. I was the, pesky little brother and the fly on the wall. And, I observed them like zoo animals. And I credit that with, and total respect. I didn't write Mary Sue characters. I wrote characters that had challenges, that had heartache, that had horrible things happen to them that they had to overcome, and they would learn from their mistakes and use their wits and abilities and strengths that they gained through practice or whatever. And wrote bad girls too. So, but I never did. I never did cheesecake comics. I always wrote. I always said I was proud of the Birds of Prey because we had a hit comic book about two women who kept their clothes on. Because you remember, 90s, go over to Image, other companies, it was all, what they refer to as TNA. If you don't know what TNA comics are, I'm not going to tell you. Ask your mother. Okay, do you have a favorite true crime podcast? Speaking of people who aren't Mary Sue's, yes. Emily Capano's true crime podcast is the best because it's the only one I listen to. She doesn't get hysterical. She doesn't get overwrought. She's a lawyer herself. And if you know her from the Greg Gutfeld show where she plays kind of a flibbertigibbet, that's like her comedic persona on the Gutfeld show, because everyone on the Gutfeld show has to adopt a comedic persona, usually dictated by Greg. Her podcast is serious stuff. It's serious stuff. And I like it because she doesn't do the, shocking serial crime, whodunit kind of podcast. She explores everything. And she does tremendous informed interviews with medical examiners, police detectives, FBI agents, sometimes connected to a case, sometimes not. And she asks all the questions that you would ask, even the dumb questions, that seem dumb, but the answers are always amazing. And she just has this natural curiosity, and she's also an invisible interviewer. She asks the question and she just lets them talk. And these people have, incredible stories to tell. And then sometimes she'll do more narrative podcasts where she'll go into the specifics of a particular crime. And she'll go back in the past, go back 20, 30 years and talk about, fascinating cases, the forensics, the investigation, cold cases and how they were solved and everything else. It's real good stuff. And like I said, it doesn't get hysterical like Dateline or Nancy Grace or any of that. For a writer, it's a treasure trove of detail on, procedural stuff, police procedural stuff. But good stuff. One more thing. Last couple of weeks, I haven't recommended any movies. A few of you said, hey, why'd you stop doing that? So let's move up to 1981. We moved through the 70s. We're into the 80s. 1981, Ms. 45. Ms. 45 is a movie directed by Abel Ferrara, who you may know from other movies like King of New York, Body Snatchers, The Bad Lieutenant. And this was at the beginning of his film career, filmed on a no budget, filmed on the cheap, filmed without permits in New York City. It features Zoe Lund, a Swedish actress, as a deaf mute who is like on the lower economic rungs in New York City in the 1980s. And in 1980, it's actually 1970s, because the 70s really didn't end by 1981. Disco was still very much with us. And she is sexually assaulted, and horrible. And then she's sexually assaulted again. But now something switched in her mind. And the second guy who tries to assault her pays with his life. I don't want to spoil anything, but she beats him to death with an iron, the steam iron. And it's a terrific scene. The thing about Ms. 45 is it's a grindhouse movie. I mean, that's pretty obvious. It's a grindhouse movie. It's Death Wish with a woman, but it's kind of an anti-grindhouse movie. If you ever watched, if you're old enough to have actually seen a grindhouse movie at a grindhouse, with an audience of 100% men on a Wednesday afternoon, there's a little bit of a smell of skunky beer in the air. This is a rough crowd. They just got fired at the Navy Yard, whatever. They're going to be homeless next week. That's your grindhouse crowd. They viscerally react to movies like this. Now, I didn't see this movie at Grindhouse, but I can imagine the reaction, because every time you thought you're going to see some, we're going to see some skin, something horrible would happen. We're going to see some skin. No, she's beating that guy to death with an iron. Oh no, she's putting bullets in that guy's head. So anyway, this sort of like raised the expectation of Grindhouse viewers, and then would, collapse them as this woman goes on this, bloody revenge mission against all men who are in any way sexual predators. And it's got a really like dreamlike quality to the film. Ferreira kind of shows a preview of the kind of chops he would later display. But like I said, there's no money. They made this on a zero budget. They made this, Larry Cohen couldn't have made this movie on this, this budget, and he made movies with no money. But if you can find it anywhere, and I'm not sure where this appears or where it's streaming, check it out if you're into grindhouse 70s grunge revenge flicks. It's a goodie. Next one is Honky Tonk Freeway, also released in 1981. This was one of the biggest budgeted movies ever made, and it bombed. It bombed huge. And it's a John Schlesinger movie. Made a lot of great A pictures. And this was like just a bid to, I don't know what the point of this movie was. It's fun. It's a fun movie to watch, but I don't know why they expected this to be a big hit. The basic premise of the movie is William Devane is the mayor of a small Florida town, and they rely heavily on tourism. And they're going to build an interstate that's going to bypass the town. So the tourist traffic is no longer going to come through town. They're just going to blow past this little town at 70 miles an hour. And Devane's like, well, what can we possibly do about this? And he does everything. He hires a water skiing elephant. They put billboards up along the highway. But the problem is, the next exit, you got to drive 10, 20 miles back to his town. The exits are too far apart. There's no exit for his town. And so the citizens of his town decide to make their own exit. And the whole movie is this huge ensemble cast of characters on their way to this freeway, to this section of freeway, from New York City, from Boston, from Philadelphia, from Tennessee, from Kentucky, wherever. They're all traveling south into Florida, into the Sunshine State, and they're all going to be driving past this tiny little town on the freeway until they get to this exit. And it's got Howard Hessman, George Zunda, Terry Garr, Beverly D'Angelo, Beau Bridges, and in the movie's funniest sequence, Peter Billingsley. If you've seen the movie, you know the scene I'm talking about. It's one of the funniest scenes I've ever seen in a movie. It's cute funny. But the whole point of the movie was, and what created the enormous budget was, as they build a new exit, and it's basically they just tear a part of the highway apart, create a new exit lane with dirt, compacted dirt, and their own ramp out of dirt, so that people can get to this town. And lots of signs pointing the way. Of course, this interrupts the traffic flow, causing this enormous multi-car pileup. Crazy, Hal Needham style, car stunts and crashes and rolls and flips and jumps and everything else, with tractor trailers, cars, vans, mobile homes. I mean, it's just an incredible wreck. And, that was the whole budget for the film. That was the big promotional thing of the film. Going to come see this huge car crash. If you remember the end of Blues Brothers, it's like that. And that was the big selling point for the movie, but nobody was buying. So, unfortunately, the movie bombed at the box office, lost a fortune for the filmmakers, producers, studios. But if you can find it anywhere, it's worth checking out. It's a fun movie. It's got some great character actor performances in it. Okay, as I mentioned before, if you want to get a hold of me, if you want one of those Civil War books signed, let me know. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com. BrunoBookstore@gmail.com, and I'll hook you up. Also, send your questions. Thank you for the questions this week, by the way. So that's it for me. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking and subscribing and all the rest of that stuff. And again, thanks for the fantastic questions. And I will see all of you down the road.